Need computer training for a group or office? Contact us today to get a free demo of our training at www.teachucomp.com/enterprise-licensing.
Now you will see the ways that you can alter a pivot table or pivot chart to change what data is displayed and calculated within them. You can check and uncheck the fields that are shown in the Choose Fields to Add to Report list within the Pivot Table Fields or Pivot Chart Fields task panes to add or remove them. Once the fields have been added to any one of the four quadrants that are shown at the bottom of the task pane, you may click and drag the fields shown in these areas from one quadrant to another to rearrange the display of data if needed. When working with the fields in your pivot table, note that if you click into a worksheet cell outside of the pivot table area, the pivot table will become deselected and the pivot table fields task pane will be hidden. You can simply click back into a cell within the pivot table to reactivate the pivot table and display the pivot table fields task pane again. This same principle of selection also applies to pivot charts. You can also make use of the buttons that are shown in the Active Field button group on the Analyze tab of the Pivot Table Tools or Pivot Chart Tools contextual tabs within the ribbon to change the appearance of your pivot table and pivot chart data. When you click into a field cell within a pivot table, the name of the active field will be displayed in the Active Field text box within this button group. Also note that the Expand Field and Collapse Field buttons in the Active Field button group on the Analyze tab can be used to collapse and expand the detailed data for any actively selected field within an outlined group. In this same button group, you can select a field and then click the Field Settings button to open a dialog box where you can change the settings of the active field within the pivot table or pivot chart. If you need to enable or disable the display of the Pivot Table Fields or Pivot Chart Fields task pane for any reason, then you can click the Field List button that appears within the Show button group on the Analyze tab within the Pivot Table Tools contextual tab in the ribbon to show and hide the Pivot Table Fields task pane. This same button is located within the Show Hide button group on the Analyze tab within the Pivot Chart Tools contextual tab within the ribbon when you have a pivot chart selected instead.
Like what you see? Get a free demo of our training for groups of 5 or more at www.teachucomp.com/enterprise-licensing.